And the first speaker is Ron Webb, and he's going to speak about gun rights. Ron Webb served in the U.S. Air Force as an air policeman from 1962 to 1966 with a tour in Vietnam in 1965 to 66. He has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Georgia State University and a master's degree in public administration from Central Michigan University. Ron served 4 years with the Georgia State Patrol and 6 years as a special agent with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. In 1978, he was appointed as a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and served 22 years, attaining executive rank as an assistant special agent in charge. Ron retired from the FBI in 2000 and moved to Sati, Nacoochee in 2006. He's a member and trustee of the Nacoochee United Methodist Church, where he's the past president of the men's group, and he has served as past president of the North Georgia Veterans. Headquartered in Big Canoe, Georgia, and is the founder and current president of the Northeast Georgia Veterans Society, headquartered in Cleveland, Georgia. Ron is also vice chairman of the Society of Former Special Agents of the FBI in Atlanta and vice chairman of the White County, Georgia Republican Party. Ron is married to the beautiful Debbie Clark Webb and has 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. Please welcome Ron.
I got some of my material from a article out of the Federalist Society of Ryan Kleckner. He's an attorney and a former Special Forces operator with the U.S. Army. And he had an approach where he debunked the popular arguments of the gun control advocates. And his first one was, the Second Amendment only applies to the right to own guns for use in a militia. Well, our Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Our Constitution does not give us rights. Rather, it affirms rights that we already have in order to safeguard them. Note that the Second Amendment didn't read the right of people to keep and bear arms. That isn't given by that language. Instead, our rights to keep and bear arms, which exist outside the Constitution, is protected by the government. In 2008, in the Supreme Court case, District of Columbia versus Heller, the right of the individual to bear arms was affirmed by the Supreme Court decision. It was an individual private right. Justice Scalia wrote, the militia is mentioned as a goal for the protection of our right to keep and bear arms. It's not a requirement. A helpful analogy would be a well-educated electorate being necessary to the preservation of a free society. The right of the people to read and compose books shall not be infringed. In this example, you can see the right to read and compose book is not reserved but to those that are registered voters or just well-educated people. Instead, the goal is for all the electorate to have the tools for an education and free expression. Likewise, our right to keep and bear arms is protected in the event a well-regulated militia is needed to defend our country or defend ourselves from the tyranny of a tyrannical government. Some people may say that we have the Constitution that protects us from a tyrannical government. I beg to differ. We do have the separation of powers, states' rights, the right of habeas corpus, those are well-established laws, but those laws can be changed. I think the Native Americans would have grounds to present a case that they were subjected to a tyrannical government. I think African Americans could have a persuasive argument that a tyrannical government imposed slavery on them. So I believe that our rights to keep and bear arms is most important to protect us from a tyrannical government, which was the reason for the Second Amendment in the first place. The second argument, the Second Amendment only applied to muskets. Anti-gunners often claim that modern rapid-fire arms are not protected. This argument assumes that muskets were the only type of arms in existence when the Second Amendment was written. That's not true. They were repeating rifles at that time, and the muskets were military-grade weapons. So the framers of the Constitution wanted the citizenry to have equal arms to protect themselves from a oppressive government. If this argument were valid, then smartphones and social media would not be protected as forms of speech under the First Amendment, because these modern rapid-fire forms of communications were not around back then. Criminals won't have guns if we ban them. You know, that's absurd on its face. Law-abiding citizens will obey the law. Criminals do not obey the law. It's written they're criminals. The definition of a criminal is someone who doesn't obey the law. If the crime of and penalty for murder didn't stop criminals from conducting mass shootings, another law is not going to prevent them from killing someone. As an example, bombs are already legal. However, neither the penalty for murder nor the penalty against making bombs stopped the Oklahoma City bombing, the Boston Marathon bombing, and a serial bombing in Austin recently. Not only would a gun ban not work, it will ensure the only people who have guns will be the criminals and the police. The fourth argument, AR-15s, certain semi-automatic rifles should be banned. Again, the criminals won't obey the laws. In France, they've suffered several mass shootings since 2015, and these were carried out by assault-type weapons, and those weapons have been banned for 20 years in France. Although rifles are popularized by the media are not regularly used in violent crimes. In fact, according to the FBI, hammers and blunt instruments are used in more murders than rifles. Rifles not used in all mass shootings. The shooters in Maryland, Fort Hood, and Virginia Tech didn't use rifles, they used handguns. And just like with the terrorists of 9/11, they used a box cutter to wreak their tragic murders. Likewise, vehicles are most commonly used by drunk drivers and those texting while driving to kill people. These people don't have a murderous intent. However, many more deaths are caused in this manner, and it is still the fault of the person and not the tool used. And recently, San Francisco City Council proposed that they declare the NRA a terrorist organization. Will the City Council also call the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers terrorists? Because cars kill over twice as many people as guns. The Alliance for Automobile Manufacturers is a lobby group that promotes sale of cars. The NRA is a lobby group that promotes the sale of guns. What is the difference? AR-15 is certain auto. Oh, I got that one. The next one is, we must raise the rifle purchase age to 21 years old. Currently under federal law, an 18-year-old can legally purchase a rifle or shotgun, but the purchaser must be 21 years old for a handgun. Either 18-year-olds are adults or they aren't. If an 18-year-old is not responsible enough to purchase a rifle or shotgun, then he's not responsible enough to vote, join the military, drive a car, or be treated as an adult in the criminal justice system. Raising the minimum age to purchase firearms wouldn't have changed 29 of the 30 most massive shootings in U.S. history. 26 of the 30 were committed by someone 21 years of age or older. One was committed by a 20-year-old who stole his mother's firearm, the Sandy Hook shooter, and number 7 was gun-free zones are safe places. In fact, the opposite is true. Gun-free zones are a magnet for mass shooters. Although every mass shooter has occurred in a gun-free zone. Places with strict gun control have shooting problems. Don't have shooting problems. Not true. Take a look at Chicago. Chicago had 762 guns death in 2016 alone. 4,331 shootings. In France, which has very strict gun control laws, 532 casualties from mass shootings in 2015. Reducing guns will reduce gun violence. According to FBI statistics in 2004, over 1,900, after 1994 federal assault weapons ban ended, violent crime actually fell. In fact, violent crimes have fallen by more than 50% since 1997 when the ban was in effect. I'm going to skip the last two for that. In the gun ban vein, I'd also end with, of course, in Germany, Hitler banned guns for the Jews from having guns, and over 6 million were killed. In Russia, Stalin banned private gun ownership, except for smooth bore shotguns, and millions were murdered. In China, in 1938, Mao declared political power grows from the barrel of a gun. He outlawed gun ownerships, and up to 2 million people were killed by the government or government thugs. In Venezuela, they banned private gun ownership in 2012, and they have the second highest murder rate in the world. Honduras is the only one. Venezuela has 56 homicides per 1,000. The U.S. has 5.3. That's my lecture for tonight.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Webb. Any questions from the audience? Oh, Mr. Behan.
I find it interesting that the shooter, does everybody remember the theater in Colorado that was site of a mass killing?
Yes.
What a lot of people do not know is that that shooter passed 4 other theaters to get to that theater. Why? Those other theaters were not gun-free zones. The theater he did the shooting in was a gun-free zone. He knew that he would have less chance of facing opposition there.
Yes, Ms. Rainworth?
Yes, the point that Mr. Webb was making about the origin of the Second Amendment, primarily being to protect against our own government turning into a tyranny against its own citizens. You would consider it at the time of our founding what was going on. We just finished the Revolutionary War. Our people here were actually British citizens, and they were disarmed. They were attempted to disarm in the first battle, like at Lexington Green. The battle at Concord, if you recall, was when the British were going to take the colonists' armor guns away at the armory. So they were attempting to disarm the colonists. So it was a tyrannical government, British government, that our framers of our Constitution were thinking about when they crafted the Second Amendment. They weren't crafting the Second Amendment to protect our hunting rights, or even to protect our ability to protect our homes from robbers and burglars and so forth. It was to protect our citizens from a good government that they were creating, ever turning into a tyranny. So and there's all these arguments about well, you don't need a AR what is it?
AR-15.
AR-15 to go hunting. Well, maybe you don't, but consider if you had a tyrannical government, if you had a single shot 22 rifle, how much good you could do against the heavy armament of the machine guns and tanks and so forth of the tyrannical government that's crushing you. So we have to put down these straw men that they throw up about the reasons for the creation of the Second Amendment. It was to protect us from a good government turning bad.
That is the basic reason for it, to me. Is the most important reason, is to protect you from the tyranny of oppression by a government.
I'm going to point out one thing. You think it doesn't happen, even today. Here's a book called Death by Government. The author is R.J. Romo. He catalogs in here one government after another that has murdered its own citizens in mass. He goes into Nazi Germany. He goes into the Great Leap Forward in Communist China, where they killed 60 million of their own citizens. He goes into Soviet Union, Soviet Russia right after the revolution, where they starved to death millions of their own citizens. Here's a good book that demonstrates in great detail how governments can turn criminal against their own citizens. I recommend it to you. It's called Death by Government by R.J. Romo.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. In that same vein, I'm sorry, go ahead. Okay.
You can go ahead, I'll follow you.
Well, I was just going to say it kind of feeds off of what he just mentioned on online question was, why does anyone need a semi-automatic assault rifle?
I wanted to, go ahead, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
It sounds like the questioner doesn't really understand what semi-automatic means. Semi-automatic means you pull the trigger once and it fires one shot. If you want to fire another shot, you have to pull the trigger again. Then eventually you run out of whatever's in the magazine. Now, one of the arguments used is limit the magazines to 10 shots. It's very simple to train yourself to be able to change magazines within 2 or 3 seconds. The military can do it in less, but you can change magazines very quickly. And that 10 shot minimum means nothing to anybody who knows what they're doing. But what people confuse with is these big, scary guns that look like what the military has. Well, they do, some of them. Some of them are built, some of the AR-15s are built to look somewhat like M16s. But they're different. They're built that way because, for the same reason that some people like to have a car, a sports car, a Mustang, or a Corvette that looks like cars they see racing. Well, The same thing applies to guns. It's fun to have a scary looking gun. But that gun, the basic mechanism of the gun, doesn't work any differently than the old M1 that was used in World War I. One shot, pull the trigger once, you get one shot. These are not automatic weapons. They're not the same thing. But everybody sees all these movies, you know, you pull the trigger, you get 20 shots. It's not like that.
I would answer the online question. The bottom line is they want a semi-automatic weapon for self-protection and protecting your family. If an intruder is coming in at night and you have a handgun, you can't see the sights on a handgun. You have to be very proficient and trained very often, because that type of skill is very perishable. It's just like golf. If you don't play it often, your skill perishes. An assault rifle or a semi-automatic rifle, you don't have to aim it. You point it, pull that trigger, and your assailant is going to flee or be killed. So it's an intimidating factor, and it may save a life. If he sees you got an assault weapon, he may run instead of continuing his criminal act.
Very interesting. Yes, sir.
My name is Michael Powell. I'm a resident of White County. In fact, I'm honored to live in the community with the speaker, Mr. Ron Webb. I understood you are a resident of the Saltee Cooch area. Is that correct?
Correct.
I appreciate the letter that you wrote to the editor recently. An excellent letter.
Thank you.
I want to add one comment to the nomenclature of these defense weapons. I imagine there are some owners of AR, in fact, I know there is a owner and probably several owners of AR-15s in this audience tonight. And I would say that there's not a single one in here who owns an AR-15 to assault anyone. I would say that if each owner here tonight would probably say that they have their AR-15 as a major reason to defend themselves, particularly against the potential of a tyrannical government. I will say that that would be the inspiring reason for me personally to own one of these defensive weapons, while it could be used as an assault weapon. Probably never. I hope I never have to use it to assault anyone coming into my home. Now, if we just simply approach this assault versus defensive on a ratio basis, Mr. Webb probably has some figures to confirm that out of the probably 15 million people who own guns in this country, the people who use them to assault, divided by the number of owners, would be thousands to one. People who use rifles, shotguns, pistols, for defensive methods as opposed to assault. Would that be the case, Mr. Webb? That the people who actually use, for instance, AR-15s to assault someone would be a minute fraction of the people who own AR-15s to defend themselves, their family, and their freedom?
It would be excessively minute.
Infinitesimally small.
Right.
That's correct. So, my suggestion to everyone here, and through the mouthpiece of people who are here, to say to the people, as the representatives in Kennesaw, Georgia did a few years back, they recommended the ownership of guns as a responsible, civil approach to good citizenship and good government. I recommend that every household in this country own an AR-15 and never intend to use it except for defense. And it would not be considered in that case an assault rifle. You assault assailant, you do not assault anyone if you're a law-abiding citizen. Therefore, there's absolutely no danger of this rifle jumping up on its own and assaulting others. Scientifically, it is impossible.
You know, Switzerland has that same law that you're talking about. Every person, and I think there's, you know, real elderly people, things like that, but every person is required to have a gun in Switzerland. And Switzerland has one of the lowest crime rates of any country, certainly in Europe or in the world. I mean, it is, for crime rates, it is at the bottom of the list. And because they don't have that much of a standing army, they rely on their citizen militias for their defense. And every able-bodied person is required to have a weapon.
Well, I want to add on to what Ron just said, and talking about what Mr. Powell said earlier. I've been following the thread, the debate going on in the White County News between Mr. Webb and some gun grabbers out there. And I own a gun. I'm a pretty good shot, but I'm not a gun enthusiast. So as soon as I saw that conversation, I started searching for more information about it. And it's like Ron just said. In Switzerland, there's 8 million people living in Switzerland. It's about the population size of Georgia. And more than 2 million people own a gun. Now, you think that's only a quarter of the population. But if you think about it, more than 2/3 of the Swiss population is families. So if 2 million people own guns in Switzerland, if all the men who are eligible for military service own a gun and are trained by the Swiss government in how to properly use that gun, then that means that every family, statistically speaking, every family in Switzerland owns a gun. Now, what Ron just said about there being no crimes, in 2017, the Swiss government reported 71 homicides across the country. But of those 71, less than 20 were committed using firearms, and there were no mass shootings. And that 71 has only decreased since then. Last year, it was in the 20s. For a population of 8 million people, that's almost non-existent. And so I don't think the problem is necessarily guns. I think the problem is people's mindsets. I mean, if you look at the timeline of mass shootings in America and the rise of anti-gun movements, it coincides, I think, with God being removed from schools. In the 80s, you see the Ten Commandments and Bibles being starting taken out of the classrooms, and so and you see a rise of gun fatalities in the United States. I think the problem really is hearts and minds. I mean, there was an interesting article today that came out, or no, it was yesterday, sorry, letter to the editor. It was somebody who said that they were tired of people saying that guns don't kill people, people kill people. But if that were true, then why is it that people also die from car crashes, that people also die from airplanes being slammed into buildings? I mean, earlier this week, we remembered the 18th anniversary of the worst terrorist attack the United States has ever suffered. 3,000 people died and not a single shot was fired. The problem is not guns. The problem is hearts and minds.
Thank you, Mr. King.